Good morning. My name is Sarah Hudnall, and I will be completing our reading today. My husband Justin and I have attended Calvary for the last 15 years, and I'm currently connected on the Connections team here. Our reading today is from Mark 12, verses 28 through 34. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, asked him, "Which commandment is the most important of all?" Jesus answered, "The most important is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." And the scribe said to him, "You are right, teacher. You have said that he is one, and there is no other beside him. And to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." And when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And after that, no one dared to ask him any more questions.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, my name is Zack Thompson. I'm on staff here at Calvary Bible Church. And this month we are taking time to pause and reflect on a really important part of our church's history. I'm excited that next month we're back in a book of the Bible, which is where we normally are as we are going through the book of 1 Corinthians in its entirety in a series that we call a Mark It Up. So we camp out in a passage, we look at the words, the phrases, the sentences to really dive deep to understand what did God say in this passage, in this book, so that we can understand how we are shaped now by it. But that is what we're doing next month. As I said, this is a really important time in the life of our church. As we are spending this month looking at how God has called us to this place, how God has put this church here, and for the amount of time that we've seen him be faithful. This year marks 135 years of Calvary Bible Church. 135 years of God's name being known in first Boulder, and then in Erie, and in Thornton. 135 years of God constantly being faithful. 135 years of story after story of seeing God work through his people. 135 years of having a numberous examples as to why we are thankful for our God. And so we want to take this time in this month to pause as we are looking at these stories, as Pastor Tom is going to be out here next week to help us see all that we have to celebrate over these 135 years that we've had as Calvary Bible Church. As we are looking at these incredible stories of God's faithfulness, it's helpful for us to pause, to stop and see, how do we remain faithful to this ever-faithful God? He has constantly been with this church. How do we respond in the way that he calls us to be a church? And as another example of God's faithfulness, we don't have to guess. We don't have to try very hard to see what does God call for his people to do, because what we find in the Bible is a commandment that is called the greatest. We just had a section of Mark chapter 12 read for us where Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment? And this is helpful considering the fact that there's 613 commandments in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. So a summary would be helpful for that, right? What is the greatest commandment, he is asked? What is it more than anything else? And all these commands that God gives to his people in a way for them to live that's for their good and for his glory, what is the greatest commandment? All throughout Mark chapter 12, Jesus has been asked questions on his understanding of the law. How does he understand what God said to do? But it's not just good faith questions. A lot of it has been traps set for him, or asking him really difficult questions, really nuanced parts of the law. And all throughout, Jesus answers magnificently. I mean, it turns out that Jesus as God is pretty good at understanding God's law. But we get to this question that comes from this guy who's referred to just as a scribe. The scribe hears all that Jesus has been saying and is impressed by his answer. Scribes at the time were kind of this unique combination of theologian, one who studies God, and lawyer. And the reason for that is they would be the most schooled, the most versed on what the law said, and helping people to know how to live that, not just for religious reasons, but as a society. It was a society that was trying to live as God's law. So your theologians were your lawyers. I bet you're all grateful that I'm not your lawyer. That would be a terrible situation for all of us. But he hears this, that Jesus has been answering so well throughout all of these questions that he asks him a question himself. And it's a question that would get asked many times to many different rabbis or people whose opinions that you respected. What is the greatest commandment? It wasn't just pick your favorite, but as you hear of the commandments, what do you think summarizes them? What do you think holds as a place of priority? What do you think we should emphasize more than anything else? He asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And out of all of those commandments, Jesus says that the people of God, the summary of all, the heart of the law that God gives to his people, for what the people of God are to be doing more than anything else, is to love God and love others. And so let's take that first part first. Jesus asks, what is the greatest commandment? And he says to love God. Out of all these other commandments, all of these other places, the primary thing that the people of God are to do is to love God. But he doesn't just stop there. He quotes from a section of the Old Testament. He quotes from the actual law in the Torah itself to show the extent to which the people of God are to love God. And so I'm going to read that exact quotation for us. It comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 5. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." This is what Jesus is referencing. He says this is the greatest commandment, to love God. This passage that's referred to here is often just known as by one word, and it's known as the Shema. See, back before the Bible had chapters or verse numbers, which are really helpful for us, back before then, you would refer to a part of the Old Testament, especially a famous part of it, by just referencing the first word of that section. And so here we have the word hear is the first word. And the Hebrew word for hear is Shema. So when you said Shema, you're referencing that whole section that comes from it. And when we talk about famous passages, there probably is no more famous passage in the Old Testament than this one. This would be something that even to this day is still holds so dear to Jewish people now. And at the time of Jesus, this would have been referenced and recited multiple times throughout the day. Often, it would be the first thing that a Jewish person would say when they woke up. It'd be the last thing that they would do before they go to bed. You know, the time slots that we're normally just on our phone? The people of God were looking at what God's word said for them, focused on this command that Jesus says is the greatest of all. Love God. And the passage starts by referencing the fact that God is one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And this speaks to the fact that there is no other God but him. There's no opposition to him. There's no rival gods. God is one, the one and only God. But not just that he's one in number. It's one in that he is unmatched. He has no opposition. Nothing can rival him. God is one above all else. So before God even does any action in our life, before God does anything to bring about goodness within our life, God is worthy of all of our love due to his perfection, due to his goodness, due to the fact that God is one. The passage goes on to show the different ways that we love this God, that we are called to love our God. And it speaks to these different parts of ourselves that we love God with. It says, love God with all your heart. It goes a little bit more than kind of the modern understanding of what the heart is for. We speak of the heart as the source of our affections, which is good and true, but our affections can be kind of flippant. I mean, we even acknowledge this. Oh, the heart wants what it wants. But when it speaks here of loving God with all your heart, it's, yes, the source of our affections, the center of our emotions, but it's also what is most true and core about someone. That is what is meant by heart. See, we can say something that's not true with our mouth. We can lie with our lips. Or we can say something that doesn't actually share anything about us. You ever had that time where you're sharing something, but it's not actually getting to the core of who you are? You're just kind of saying the words. We can do that with our mouth. But the content of our heart is what is most true and real about us. So we love God with all of our hearts, with our emotions, yes, our affections, yes, but with what is most real and true about who we are as well. Not just lip service, but loving God with all of our heart. We love God with all of our soul. This is that immaterial part of you, that spiritual part that is in every person. That no matter the circumstances of what we're going through, no matter what is happening in this physical world, we love God with that part that's unaffected by earthly pain, that's unmoved by physical needs. It's that part that's true and lasting. It's that part that makes you, and me. We love God with our soul. It says, love God with your might or your strength. So yes, this is our physical capabilities, but also all that we can hold with our strength. So all of our possessions. So we love God with our actions and all of our property, all that we have. See, your physical body, this physical world matter to God, and we love God with and through them. Some people have a misunderstanding of the purpose of this physical world. We just see it as, well, we just got to escape this place. My home is in heaven. I got to leave this place behind so I can get there. And while that's true, we don't want to overlook the fact that God made this world, and we live in this place, and we love God through what is in this world. Some people have a misunderstanding of the purpose of our bodies. Like, I don't need to care about this thing. God's going to give me a new one. You know what else God gave you? Your body, the one that you have right now. And so we love God, not just with what might happen in the future. We love God with all that we have now in this place that he has us. Jesus has a fourth one that he mentions that we might not see in Deuteronomy. And he says to love God with all of your mind. Again, the idea of the heart gets to this part, that we love God not just with our affections, but with our thoughts and our understandings. We love God with our perceptions and reflections. See, we don't seek to have perfect understanding of God because that's impossible, but God has made himself known to us. And so we use our mind to know more and more about this God, because as we do so, we love him more as we know him more, but we also aren't blown off course or led astray by false teaching. Sin entered into this world with a simple question. Did God actually say? And the way that we often turn away from God is by not knowing what God actually said. Do we know what God has said to us? Because as we seek understanding in him, we do so as we love God with our mind. This section speaks of how we love God. But it's not as though we're putting different categories in opposition to each other. It's not as though, I'm just not really good at loving God with my soul, but, I make up for it by loving God with my mind. That's not how it works. What is being spoken of here is how we are to love God with everything that we have. Every part of us is directed toward loving the God who is the only one who's worthy of our love. But it's not as though that we just have little parts of ourselves that love God. It says that we love him with every part of everything that we have. Love God with all of your heart. Love God with all of your soul. Love God with all of your strength. Love God with all of your mind. See, the idea is that God loves every bit of you. And so we use every bit of who we are to love God. This means no matter where we are, we love God. We love God while we're here at church, but we love God as well when we're at home, at school, at work. We love God with our feelings, our emotions, our affections. We love God with our actions. The things that we do are places that we love God. We love God with our thoughts and beliefs and ideas. We love God with all that we make, all that we have, all that we hold. Calvary, your God is love. Your God is one. So we use all that we have to love this God. But Jesus adds on to this idea as well. He's asked, what is the greatest commandment? He says, love your God, and he quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, but he adds to it as well to love others. Now, it may seem like Jesus is trying to sneak in a little bit of an extra answer here. Like if I'm asked, if you were stuck on a desert island, what's the one thing that you would bring with you to survive? I might be a jerk and say America, because I might actually have enough resources then to survive in that place. But that's not what Jesus is doing. He's not sneaking in an extra second answer here. It's still the same answer. It's one and the same. Because to love God means that we love others. They are inseparable. To do the first means that we would do the second as well. And again, to get to this idea, Jesus quotes from the Old Testament. He's asked, what is the greatest commandment? Let me show you the greatest commandment, and it's in Leviticus chapter 19. Now, I'm not going to show us this greatest commandment. We're not going to read through Leviticus 19, and since it's Leviticus, I'm sure you are all delighted that we're not going to read through a chapter of that. But if you were to read through Leviticus 19, you would see a tremendous number of examples of how Israel was called to love their neighbor as themselves. They were given practical examples of how they can do this very thing. And it speaks of leaving margin in your life to care for the poor, the disabled, the marginalized. It's about not doing wrong to anyone, not being part of any injustice towards other people. In fact, it's the opposite. It's stomping out injustice wherever it's seen. It's not letting hate or envy or spite build up towards another person. It's about holding each other accountable to what God calls his people to do. Generally, Leviticus 19 says to love your neighbor as yourself is to be looking out for and a part of the well-being of others in your life. And that idea of loving others like yourself, it's not as though it's speaking of vanity. Like, to first love others, I need to just really love myself first. No, that part comes instinctually to us. By instinct, we look out first for what benefits us, what's good for us, what builds up our lives. And what Jesus says to do, what the Old Testament said to do, is to prioritize other people with that same level. That by instinct, look out for others as much as we look out for ourselves. Now, initially, this is speaking, Leviticus 19 is speaking to those who would have been in the people of God as well. So love those who are part of the people of God as well. But it goes on to expand this idea of who our neighbor is, to expand this idea of who we are to love like ourselves. So I will read a part of Leviticus. I lied to you. That's fine. Leviticus doesn't say not to do that or anything. But I'll read just a little bit of this understanding of who is our neighbor. That comes from Leviticus chapter 19, starting in verse 33. It says, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, so someone who's not part of your people, not part of the people of God, when they are with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. The same idea. It's carried through here. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. I mean, is there a more convicting or more difficult passage for Coloradans than this? You have to treat everyone like a native? That just doesn't sound possible. But the idea is, and by Jesus quoting it in this context, Jesus is speaking to this idea that everyone is your neighbor. That the person you are to love like yourself is every single person that you meet. Not just the people who are like us, not just the people that we like, but we are to love everybody like ourselves. This means that person in your neighborhood who has their candidate sign up right now, that you realize if they get elected, America is going to be destroyed. That person who has that sign up, that's your neighbor. And we're to love them like ourselves. Or the guy down the street who still has their flag up where they're cursing at the current president, well, not actually saying any of the naughty words. That's your neighbor, and we love them like we love ourselves. Or that person who doesn't have an address by you. In fact, they don't have an address at all. They used to live in a camp with some other people, but then it got tossed because there were some complaints. So they looked for a spot in a shelter, but there's just not enough positions for people to go through because we see the need of it, but we don't want to fund it, and we don't want it on our block. That person is your neighbor. And we love them like ourselves. So are Russians and Ukrainians and Israelis and Palestinians. And yes, even Kansas City Chiefs fans. They are your neighbor, and we are to love them like ourselves. But again, it's not speaking of different commands here. It's not as though love God, and also, if you can, love others. A love for God causes us to love our neighbor. Because in part, because God made that person. He made them uniquely. He made them in his image. And on the flip side of that, we show that we love God by showing love to what, or in this case, who it is that God loves. And this idea is spoken to as well all throughout the Bible, probably most clearly in 1 John chapter 4. This is 1 John chapter 4, verse 20. It says this, if anyone says, I love God, but hates his brother, he is a liar. He is a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. Again, these ideas are brought together. As we love God, that causes us, it's linked with us loving others as well. Love God and love others. All this comes, again, as this scribe asks Jesus this question, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, love God and love others. As the scribe hears this answer, he acknowledges it. He affirms it. Yeah, loving God, loving others, that's more important than anything else. That's more important than the sacrifices. That's more important than looking the part. That's more important than doing all the right spiritual and religious things. Because if we aren't loving God, if we aren't loving others, everything else is useless. And Jesus says to him, you're so close. You're so close. Because he hears these words of Jesus, he acknowledges that they are good, but it's not enough to just like the words of Jesus. It's not enough to just say, yeah, that sounds about right. We then do what he says. You're not far from the kingdom of God. To be part of that, be part of my people, is to go and do these things as well. To listen to me, to follow after what I'm calling you to do, to obey this commandment that I'm giving, to love God and love others. In other words, to be a Christian, to be a church, as we're pausing to look at what does it mean for us to be faithful as a church, the primary description of what it is to be a person following Jesus is someone who loves. We love God and we love others. A former professor of mine had these kind of diagnostic questions that go along with this section. How do we know if we're loving God with all that we have? How do we know if we're loving our neighbor as ourselves? I mean, there's plenty of times that we recognize it is pretty clear to us, I'm not doing those things, but sometimes it's a bit more subtle than that. Sometimes we don't realize that our affections have been directed towards something else. And so we ask these three questions as a way for us to look at where is my love going? The first question that he gave was, if Jesus came back right now, would I be disappointed? If Jesus came back right now, would I be disappointed? Before graduation? Before I ever got to get married? Before I ever got to be a grandparent? There's things that we look forward to in this life, and so many of them are good things. But it can get to the point to where we are looking forward to something here on this earth more than we were looking forward to the one who made this earth. That there are places that get in the way. There are rivals for our affection, for our love, rather than God, and we need to be aware of that. It's really easy. We are people made to love. We are made to love God. But it's really easy to apply that to lesser things rather than the God who is one, the God who is worthy. Second question is, can I say thank you to God in the midst of my present circumstances? That what's going on in life, can I thank God, praise God in the midst of that? Or instead, do we think God owes us something? God, I've been following you. Why are you letting this happen in my life? Or do we let what's going on impact our relationship with God? You know, God, I'd love to be praying more. I'd love to be in my Bible more, but things are just so crazy in my life right now. Or instead, can we be someone who says, even if my world fell apart like Job's did, as long as I have God, I'm going to be fine. The third question is, am I out of sorts with anyone? Is there a broken relationship that I am responsible for, that I am not putting in the effort to make amends with? Am I hesitant to show care and compassion to the people who are around me? I've instead just been focused on myself rather than loving others like myself. See, the point in these questions is not to bring about shame. Every single one of us cannot answer these questions perfectly. We are all growing in this together. It's not about bringing shame, but it's bringing awareness that there are rivals for our love. There are things that get in the way of our affection that is meant solely for God. And we ask these questions to always be diligent to see, am I directing this love towards God? Am I obeying this commandment Jesus said is the greatest, to love God and to love others? But it's not just for us individually. We as a church need to regularly be doing this. We need to make sure that what we are doing as a church is all towards loving God and loving others. I mean, this is where we get our vision for the church. It is given to us from Scripture. It's not us locking ourselves in a room until we come up with cool words or some fresh new idea. No, what we're called to do as a church is what the church has always been called to do. And so we put it in our vision. Love God and love others. And we have an opportunity right now as we're pausing, as we're responding to seeing how God has been faithful, how do we be faithful in return? We want to highlight the areas that we have as a church for us to try to do these things. We want to evaluate always. Is there anything that's getting in the way of this? Then that should be cut. Are we not focusing on helping people love God, love others? We need to change what we're doing. But we have an opportunity at this time to share the places where we think that this can happen, where we can love God and love others. You walked in the lobby today, and it was much more crowded than usual. Or if this is your first time here, that's not what the lobby normally looks like. But I'm so glad you get to see it in this state, because this is us showing all the places that we think that you can connect and serve to love God and love others. We call this our Connect and Serve Expo. I know it means that you have a longer walk to get to your coffee and your donuts, and I'm so sorry for your suffering. But we want to show you the places that we think God has given to us as we learn more about him, as we love God together in community, as we show the places to serve, as places to love others here in the church and outside of it, that there are places to do what God calls us to do here as a church, to love God and love others. So we're going to have an opportunity after service to see where those places are. Now, there's a lot of spots. There's a lot of tables. There's a lot of signs at the tables. The expectation is not that you are part of everything. That's impossible. Instead, the expectation is to do this one thing that has two parts. Love God. Is that reflected? Is loving God reflected in how we use our time? And what gets our interest, our energy, our investments, our possessions? And then love others as ourselves. Is that reflected in what we prioritize? What gets our care? How we pamper ourselves? Do we put as much time into caring for others as we dream about a future for us and those in our household? We love God and we love others. Now, as we talk about all this, we don't want to ignore what is said to us in 1 John chapter 4. We read verse 20 earlier. That's where we saw loving God and loving others is tied together. But the very verse before that shows the cause, shows the reason why we do this. 1 John chapter 4, verse 19 says, we love, so we love God, we love others, we love because God first loved us. So we stop, we respond to what God has been doing over 135 years. We look to see how do we remain faithful in turn, because we are people who recognize what God has done for us. We love because God first loved us. So we keep this commandment. This one that's given to us. We live as God calls us to live because we are people who have seen. We are people who have experienced God's incredible love for us. And so we love in response. We connect here, we serve here as a way to show love because we have been shown love ourselves. We look at how God has been faithful, and in response to that, in response to 135 years of God being faithful here, let alone 2,000 years of God being faithful to the church, let alone all of creation God being faithful, we respond to his incredible faithfulness because he was first faithful. Our lives are shaped personally and forever changed because we have been loved by God. See, we cannot outlove God. But as a church, we're sure going to try. Because as we fail in doing so, and we will fail in outloving God, as we do so, that means that we are discovering more and more of his love for us. The goalposts keep getting moved. We show love for other people, we recognize God loves us more. We learn more about loving God in response. Well, we're responding to more. The goalposts keep getting moved. We are people who cannot outlove God, but we are going to try as a church. Because as we do so, we recognize how deeply we are loved. And so we are people who love early, often, always, because we have been loved. Our lives are shaped forever, changed forever, because we have been so lavishly loved by God. We have an opportunity this morning to look at the greatest picture of God's love for us there is, and that's the death of Jesus on the cross on our behalf. See, all of us, we direct our affections, our love towards other things, lesser things than him, and the Bible calls that sin. And yet, while we were sinners, Jesus was sent to this world who lived perfectly obedient, perfectly loving God and loving others, never making mistakes, never sinning, never doing anything wrong, never earning ridicule or condemnation, and yet going to the cross in our stead. The punishment for sin is death, and yet we do not experience that because Jesus goes to the cross in our stead. He dies this death that was ours for us. That is the greatest picture of love that there is. While we gave our love that was meant only for God to other lesser things, God showed his incredible love for us by taking this punishment on our behalf. The night before Jesus was betrayed and arrested, he was at a meal with his disciples, and he was explaining to them exactly what he was about to do. And he took the bread that was at the table, and he broke it, and he said, "This is my body, which is given for you. I'm going to die this death so that you might have life, so that you might have salvation, so that you might have right relationship with God." And he took the cup that was there, and he said, "This is a new covenant. This is the promise. This is the basis of how you can trust this, and it's my blood that's been poured out for you." It's not you being good enough. It's not you cleaning your act. It's not you learning your lesson and changing your behavior. We can't do any of that. Jesus alone can make a way for us, and Jesus alone has made a way for us.